بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
It's a very great honor to be invited here. And when I come, I learn a great deal, not only from the speakers, as I did in the first session, which I thought was excellent, but also from speaking with people. I learn about your lives, and this is very important to me. That, for me, is a very important reality. And I think that more even than learning something, coming here makes me happy, because I see a community that is progressive, forward-looking, yes, moderate, that is successful, that is integrated, that is endlessly kind. And I see that despite what I hear on the news, that really everything's going to be okay. So that really makes me very happy to have some time with this exemplary community. So my topic today, which was actually given to me by the organizers of the conference, is culture and religion, opposition or compatibility. And I've divided this short talk, trying to attack a very large subject in a short time, into 3 parts, as you can see on the screen. First of all, I'll talk briefly about why this is an important question, and I have to say that it's a very well-chosen question that was given to me. I want to explain why I will be discussing the question of culture and religion from a rationalist perspective. And there I should also explain what I mean by rationalist. It's very important when approaching a question or a matter to define your approach. So I'll be spending some time doing that. And then I'm actually going to make an argument, as you can see in the third part, for the compatibility of culture and religion. I think that culture, as I'm going to define it, is compatible with religion. I think they're compatible one with the other, basically. And in fact, I'm going to make the argument that actually religion is part of culture, that really they cannot be separated. And I think that argument is maybe a bit unusual, but when I come to it, you can see if you agree or not, or if you understand what I'm trying to say. So why is it important to talk about the relation of culture and religion? When I sat down and asked myself that question, there were so many reasons. It's such a fundamental matter. So I wrote down a few, because it is part of a debate about what is valid and not valid as part of a religion. And the young lady who introduced me talked about sitting on the floor, standing up, sometimes certain practices in Shiism, such as mourning on Ashura in certain ways, are questioned. So it's important at that level. It's about what will be passed on to the next generation, of course, because a religion is a tradition that continues. And in each generation, you form it, and then that goes on to the next generation. And because understanding the relation of religion and culture is vital to, here I've written, American understanding and living with American culture.
Could I adjust your mic?
Okay. But I would say it's important in relating to the world. So the question of religion and culture is really about how do you live in the world? How do you relate in the world? How do you live in a multicultural society? A very basic question. So I would like to talk about the approach that I will be taking to this question. My argument is going to be made basically from the point of view of social science that I'm trained in. You might call it a philosophy of some kind. And some people might ask, how is social science a religiously relevant perspective? Aren't the human sciences, such as anthropology, philosophy, and so on, irrelevant to Islam except from an academic point of view? I would like to argue that all these things are relevant, and I would like to focus here especially on Shi'ism, because Shi'ism is, Twelver Shi'ism, as it has developed in the hands of our scholars, is a rationalist religion, and that's a very rich and important heritage. So the Shiite worldview is rationalist. Rationalist means the belief that human reason is able to perceive good, bad, and other truths. Now, many of you may know this, or possibly all of you, but it is worth emphasizing. Now, that's a theological view, which, as I say, was formed at the hands of the scholars. But it certainly grows out of the Quran, where many ayat encourage us to reflect on truth and to think. And the Imams have many sayings about reason, about aql. For instance, Imam Ali, I'm expecting a salawat, says, use your intellect to understand what you hear about. Use the intellect that examines and not just the intellect that repeats, for there are many who repeat what they hear and few who examine it. And actually, in Najl al-Balagha, Imam Ali has quite a few sayings about aql and the importance of reason. The Imams, of course, were paragons of reason, and they encouraged their followers to use reason. Actually, Ayatollah Mutahhari believes that Imam Ali and the Imams, and not the Mu'tazilites, were the first rationalists in Islam. So this is a very important heritage. Now, here I'm speaking about, as you can see on the slide, traditional rationalism, rationalism as it is seen in the old texts and tradition. So it is believed by the scholars and rooted in the sayings of the Imams that reason and revelation, and here you can see it written in Arabic, aql and naql, confirm each other and are mutually complementary. So the revealed sources, that is the Quran and the sayings of the Imams, and reason are mutually complementary. So it's said that reason is religion from the interior and religion is reason from the exterior. So what is necessary according to reason is also necessary according to religion. And what is necessary according to religion is necessary according to reason. What this rationalist standard tells us is that literalism is not good. And literalism is very much in vogue these days. Rather, one should use reason, use the text, and weigh the two, and find the truth that is in both. And that is a distinctive heritage of Shi'ism. Traditional rationalism, here I'm not speaking about modernism, but authentic traditional thought, also says that all people, non-Muslim as well as Muslim, and even non-religious people are able to understand what is good and bad and true and false to some degree. I mean, that is a Shiite theological belief. It is believed that all people are moral. They have the capacity to know good. And it's interesting that the phrase that is used to describe that, the custom of rational persons, siratul aqala is one way that it's said, has to do with the judgment and wisdom of societies, not just individuals. So it's as if societies altogether in their life, in their culture, are moral if you look at them as a whole, which is a way of saying that there is something good in valid culture everywhere, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. And if you look on the slide, the third part of number 1, Shiites have believed and still believe, because of Shiite rationalism, that philosophy is valid. There is an open and positive attitude towards philosophy, including the philosophy of the ancients, Greek philosophy in its time, and so forth. These were and are studied in the Shiite academies. So here we have an open and a thinking and an intellectual tradition. And when we are attacking a problem such as culture and religion, a matter such as culture, the relation of culture and religion, that tradition tells us to look at it intellectually, philosophically, including from the way that I'm going to be looking at it. A few words on modernist rationalism. You know that the Shiite scholars always look ahead in their ijtihad and their thought. They are not backward-looking people. So this traditional rationalism has been built on in modern times. For instance, some scholars, many scholars now give a larger role to reason, because traditionally the role of reason, for instance, in deducing the law was fairly limited. But since the early part of the 20th century, actually, and here I'm thinking particularly of a Lebanese figure that I've been studying lately, Mohammed Jawed Maghnia, there's been thought about giving reason freer rein, and that trend is very important now in Iran. And modernist rationalism, that is, modernist Shiite scholars, are willing, because of their traditional openness to philosophy, to consider now a wider range of contemporary human knowledge, like anthropology and all kinds of sciences and so forth. So that's a very solid, progressive, forward-looking tradition that one can build on to make the argument that I would like to make, an argument for the compatibility of culture and religion, for the basic compatibility of culture and religion. Now, before you approach a question, not only should you define your approach, but you should define your terms. So here I have written out my definition of culture, but it's not really my definition. If you are a student of anthropology, or there could be here a professor of anthropology, you will know that this is a pretty normal, actually Western definition of culture. So it's a very wide definition. I mean, traditionally in the West, culture in English or French or German really meant high culture, like music and so forth, but anthropologists redefined it to mean really the whole range of human activities, human life. And I think that's the most productive way to define culture, to treat the question that we are faced with. With a scientific definition of this kind, you have a way to think about the real world. There's been a lot of emphasis here on doing practical things. I want this to be a practical exercise. I want to have a wide definition so that we can think about the real world and what is happening in people's whole lives. So this definition is wide. I've made it wide because it allows us to deal with the whole reality of culture. Now, my argument, here is the part that might seem radical, but I hope that it's actually moderate, is that religion is actually part of culture and exists in the world only through culture. I really believe that. Religion is a human activity. Let's face it, the religion is a human activity. It's a human response to God's call. It has a divine origin, but it's still a set of ideas and behaviors that are learned and passed on, including cultural products, such as architecture, poetry, calligraphy, the manuscripts we saw, and so on. All of that is religion or religious culture. I would put it this way. Religion, because it's a human activity, can only be expressed through culture, just like thoughts are expressed through words and languages. Without culture, religion is not real. You can't see it. You can't experience it. That is culture in the way that I have defined it. So again, religion can only be expressed, I would say, through culture. Just like thoughts are expressed through words and languages. You need the words and languages. You need many different words and languages. To express Islam, you need Arab culture, you need the beautiful, rich culture of India, you need Iranian culture, you need American culture, ultimately, because then how can you see it? How can you experience it otherwise? I don't think this statement brings down religion at all. It only acknowledges that the world and humans are separate from God. And because we're in that separate place in the world and created, we have to relate to God from our own place, which is human life, which is culture. Okay? The only way to have no culture is for humans not to exist. I sometimes think, as it says on the slide, that the idea that religion and culture are opposed is a result just of linguistic confusion, because it's just not a logical idea, really. The great reformers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, I can give the example of Muhammad Abduh, when they critiqued what we might call culture, they didn't use the Arabic word for culture. Let's stick to Muhammad Abduh. He used the word taqalid, which sounds like taqlid, but what it really means is customs in the sense of superstitions, bad things. He and the other reformers, they had no problem with human culture. And in fact, they valued it as long as it was progressive and expressive and so forth. In fact, Ahmed Amin, who is in some ways another Egyptian, a successor to Muhammad Abduh, not a successor, but he was somewhat in the same line, wrote a well-known book on the taqalid of the Egyptians, the customs of the Egyptians. I think it's taqalidu adat. And he looked at them positively. This is the expression of a people. It's not necessarily opposed to religion. But then when it gets translated into, I don't know, English or influenced by Western thought, and in Western languages we tend to think of culture in a wider sense, you see there's a confusion. All that the reformers meant, in sum, to criticize was bad culture. We've heard about bad Sufism, good Sufism, and so forth. They only were targeting bad things. Certainly not the whole range of human culture. It simply doesn't make any sense. It's not rational. Okay? It's not a thinking way. So, my argument for the compatibility of culture and religion. First of all, I'm going to talk about the negative consequences of separating the two, because I think it has very negative consequences. And some of the very bad things that we are seeing in Iraq are somewhat the result of these mistaken ideas. And then I'll go to the positive consequences of joining the two. So, negative consequences, homogenization. Well, first of all, I should say that when you say that culture and religion are incompatible, that's really like saying that everything's bid'ah, what I call maximal bid'ah. You know, you say this is bid'ah, and this is bid'ah, and this is bid'ah. You target everything, which you know as Shiite people who come largely from India, you know that when this activity starts, you are going to be one of the targets. So I don't have to convince you of that. Now, separating culture and religion, it leads to homogenization. okay? The pure religion free of culture imagined by people who maximize bid'ah, make accusations of bid'ah all the time, in their imagination it exists in exactly and precisely one form. And that kind of makes religion monolithic, as if there should be no sects, no schools. Sometimes they even say there should not be so much variation between the legal schools. And certainly they mean that there should be no different styles of life. So regarding culture as separate from religion and in the worst manifestation of that thought, maximal bid'ah, means that all Muslims, in order to be pure, should be exactly the same. I think the ultimate implication of that logically is that everybody should be Arabs living in a certain century. It just really has no logic to it. It's more an impulse than anything. It's unreal, as I say. It's really a piece of unrealism. It can't be. But worse than unreal, it leads to, I would say, lack of ethical reflection. Okay? Thinking of religion and culture as separate and opposed to each other leads to this search for purity. You're looking always for purity if you try to separate religion and culture conceptually. And that becomes obsessive and destructive because that pure religion doesn't exist. I'm asserting that religion and culture are not separate at all. Religion is expressed through culture. So the quest for a religion pure of culture is really nonsense. But even worse, as I say, if you remove culture and religion from religion conceptually, you say that they are separate, there is no room to critique culture, except to say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, I hate this American culture, you should not do these Shiite things, and so forth and so forth. There's only room for that. But if you think of religion as part of culture, as a manifest or as expressed through culture, part of culture in that way, you have a stance from within culture to critique other culture. And instead of saying bid'ah, bid'ah, you can practice ethical reflection. You can say, is this good culture? Is this bad culture? What's the value of this? What's the ethical or aesthetic value of this or that? It's a thinking position, which I would again assert is very typical of Shiism, to think, to philosophize, to be rational. Also, this maximal bid'ah, as you can see, the third part on the slide, it's really a power grab. It's authoritarianism. I think I've virtually covered that, because if you say culture and religion are separate, it makes you a great authority. You don't have to substantiate that. You just say bid'ah, bid'ah, this is bad, that is culture, culture and not religion. And you don't have to explain it. You don't have to ethically reflect. You can focus on things like sitting on the floor or standing up, which really doesn't have a lot of ethical content. I think the authoritarianism that comes out of this conceptual problem is seen in these extremist jihadist groups. It's just really pure negativism. And that leads me to the advantages of regarding religion as part of culture. It enables ethical reflection, as I've just said, in my view. If you think that religion is manifested through culture, you're in culture, you can look at other culture, the culture of other peoples, you can critique it, think about it effectively. And very important for people living not only in America, but in this globalized world, if you think broadly about culture and don't separate it from religion, you have a way to live successfully in a pluralistic world. You have the tools and the attitude and the positivity. I think that's so important, the positivity to look positively towards other manifestations of culture, other religions, and so forth. I would assert, in my last 5 minutes, I would assert that that attitude is really encouraged by the Quran. You know, we're living in a pluralistic culture, and Muslims might think, well, this is something new. It's not new for people who came from India, for sure. But I don't think it was new in the time of the Quran also. The Quran itself takes a wide perspective on religion and the world. It doesn't look at the world negatively. Islam, as you know well, is not a world-denying religion. It's a world-embracing religion. So the Quran speaks not just about Islam, but about other religions, religiousness in general. It speaks about fitra. It was actually revealed in a multi-religious environment. Not exactly like America, but there are parallels. I mean, there was even some sense of globalization at that time, as there was trading between Mecca and great empires. So I think the global inclusive thinking of the Quran is very relevant today. It is certainly not a culture negative view. Actually, a couple of verses have been quoted in Quranic verses have been quoted in earlier talks. It occurs to me now that these are relevant to this topic. For instance, God made the community an ummatan wasatan, a middle community. Now that, as the scholar demonstrated, can be interpreted in different ways. You might think that it means that it made the Muslims as they've always been, a community in the midst of others, sitting in the midst of others so that they could be witnesses over them, not in a negative sense, but that they could look around and learn, you know, a community in the midst of others. And of course, there is the very beautiful verse, which I will give you in English. We have made you nations and tribes that you may know one another. I mean, what stronger affirmation is there of pluralism and really of appreciation of other people's culture, not just one's own religious culture? Thank you.